So I want to guide us now into a practice of like, well, what do we actually do um, when we're triggered, and how do we be with that trigger in a different way, in what we would call in this work a more skillful way that minimizes the reactivity and brings up a more wise response in us. So for this process, I'm going to invite you again to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. And if at any point in the process that becomes uncomfortable for you, feel free to open your eyes and just direct your gaze downward. Why we encourage you to close your eyes is really just because it's easier for most of us as humans. It's easier to pay attention to our experience when our eyes are closed. If that's not the case for you, then you do what works for you. And we're going to be working with one of your triggers. Again, I would encourage you, for the purpose of practice, choose, could be the trigger you wrote about just now when you did that little writing exercise, or another trigger that feels kind of like more of a day-to-day trigger, but nothing too overwhelming. So think about what you might like to work with for this practice, just for a moment. And then as you close your eyes, the very first thing I'll invite you to do in the practice is to connect back to your anchor. That anchor is something that we have worked with at our January retreat. We worked with it last month in our class, and it's something we will continue to cultivate through our program. The anchor is the spot in your body where you feel grounded, where you feel a sense of safety or strength. That anchor, in addition to being a physical location, could also have some type of image associated with it. Maybe it's a spiritual image for you, or an image of nature. Something, again, that provides this sense of safety, of groundedness. So take a moment and find that connection to your anchor. Maybe even take a couple of intentional breaths into this experience of you being anchored. This is a natural capacity that all of us have as humans to feel grounded, to feel connected, to feel safe. And whenever we're working with a trigger, even if it's a more everyday trigger, we want to work with it from this place of our anchor. So as you're connected to that anchor, imagine now the trigger that you'd like to work with for this practice. See yourself in that situation or around that person. See, sense, or even feel what that's like, being in that triggering situation or around that individual or group of people. And then as you do that, bringing an additional level of awareness to these different places that we can be affected when we're triggered. So starting with your physical body, just notice, how does my body feel when I even think about this trigger? What happens to me physically? And the same question, what happens emotionally when I'm experiencing that person or that situation? What's the predominant emotion? And what's the mental narrative that's taking place when I'm in this trigger? Is there a particular thought or judgment that keeps cycling through the mind? Also, bringing awareness to your overall nervous system, noticing, is it a fight, a flight, a freeze response, or maybe a combination of a couple of those? As you reflect all this, I'm going to invite you again to connect back with your anchor, almost as if you could sort of step out of the trigger and step back into the part of you that's observing the trigger. So you could even metaphorically imagine, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this person, from this situation, and stand in the part of me that can be aware, that can be mindful about what's going on. And in that mindfulness, we're going to go to the next part of the practice, which is called naming. As you observe yourself in the trigger, see if you can just practice naming without any judgment, just naming to yourself what you're experiencing. Keep it as factual as you can. It might be something like, I notice there's anger. I notice there's fear. I notice my fists are clenched. I notice this particular thought going on over and over in my mind. Just again, reporting without any judgment to yourself what you're experiencing when you're in that trigger. So go ahead and just silently to yourself, naming what's happening. Taking a moment again to pay attention to your anchor, to that spot in your body that feels grounded, safe. And from that anchor, posing this question to your awareness. And the question is, what about this particular situation is familiar to me? When did I feel a similar way before? This is called sourcing. So we want to take the current trigger and find out, is there a deeper source here? With questions like, what's familiar about this? When did I perhaps feel something similar before? Just doing that from awareness, and then trust any memories or information that comes to you as you reflect on this. Is anything familiar here? And now we come to what's called the magic question. Again, we want to pose this question to ourselves from a place of mindfulness. Looking at yourself when you're in that triggered state. The magic question asks, how young do I feel? How young do I feel when I'm in this triggered state? For me, Neelama at the bowling alley, I was definitely not 49 years old in that moment. I was probably emotionally maybe 7 or 8. So again, without any judgment, just posing that magic question to yourself. When I'm in this trigger with this person, with this situation, how young do I feel inside? And now I want to invite you again to connect back with your anchor. Just take a few intentional and deeper breaths into that spot of your body that feels that sense of strength, that sense of groundedness. Maybe even sit in a body posture that connects you to your sense of inner strength and inner resources. And from this place of more strength, from this anchor, imagine you could ask the part of you that is triggered, what inner resource does it need when it's experiencing this trigger? What does this part of me that's angry or afraid or scared or sad, what does this part of me need in this moment as an inner resource? Maybe it needs to feel safe, to feel accepted, to feel held or connected. So, from that anchored part of you, asking that triggered part of you, what inner resource do you need in this situation? And trust what information you get back. Once you get a sense of what that part of you needs, that younger or that triggered part of you needs, we'll go to the next step of this process, which is called linking. I want you to imagine that this anchored part of you can offer the part of you that's reacting or triggered or upset. It can literally offer that part of you whatever it needs, almost like you link the part that's missing the quality with the quality itself. Your anchor, the part of you that is your anchor, possesses all of the qualities: safety, acceptance, support, that these triggered parts of us need. So, from this anchored place in you, offering, linking that resource to the one that needs it right now. Taking just a few breaths as you imagine offering yourself that quality of support or safety, that quality of acceptance. Noticing how it feels to do that, to turn towards the trigger and hold it with such regard and offer it what it needs. See if you can recognize that meeting yourself in this way opens up more compassion. Notice how that feels in your body to hold this trigger in this different way. There might be a little bit more warmth or spaciousness. The body might feel a little less charged, a little more relaxed. Just take a moment to see as we come to the end of the practice. See if you can recognize that when you meet that trigger and offer it what it needs, that you can often recognize this is compassion right here, right now. So as we transition in a moment out of this practice, you'll hear one bell, and that's just a sign to take a deeper breath. And if your eyes were closed, you can gently bring them back. And if your gaze was down, you can raise that up. And just while the experience is still fresh as an internal experience, take a moment, if you have a piece of paper there, just to reflect what stood out to you about doing that practice we just did. Anything that stood out, anything you want to remember for yourself about that practice. And secondly, if the practice opened up another level or more access to compassion for you, how did you experience that? It may have, it may not have, but if it did, just noting, what did that feel like? So taking a couple of minutes as Kevin gets our breakout rooms ready, we'll just take a couple of minutes to reflect, maybe just jotting some points down about that. What stood out to you about this practice? Anything you want to remember? And if you accessed compassion, self-compassion, how did you experience that towards yourself?